Against that backdrop, I would like to share with you a timeless principle. Many times when God does not answer a righteous prayer, it is because we're praying too small. It's not that we're praying wrong, it's that we are praying too small. And therefore, with our small prayers, God has to accrue those prayers in the bowls in heaven that are mentioned in the book of Revelation until the bowls are full, and He can dump them out and give us that which He really wanted to give. Think of Abraham. All Abraham wanted was a son, any old son, the son of a foreign woman, the son of a slave would do. All he wanted was a son. And God desperately wanted to give him the nation above all nations, but he couldn't see it. So God had to delay the birth of this son for a period of time while the right prayer, but the too small prayer of Abraham was filling the bowls. How about Hannah? When we focus on Hannah and her desire for a son, we really miss the picture. Granted, she was in pain. Granted, there was the jealousy issue with the other wife. Granted, there were all sorts of soul complications for Hannah, but that totally misses the point of the story. The issue was God had a much bigger problem than Hannah. God needed a prophet in Israel. God needed a king-making prophet. God needed a prophet who would preside over the tremendous transition from the season of the judges to the season of the kings. And God was looking at every woman in Israel trying to find a person with a big enough spirit, with a large enough life to provide the womb that He could birth that kind of a prophet into the history of Israel. And because Hannah was praying too small, she had to pray for a long time before there was breakthrough. Think about the Azusa Street revival. William Seymour was a pastor in Texas. All he wanted was more of God for him and his little congregation. Eventually, he had to move out of Houston, and he moved to Los Angeles. He continued to work full-time to pastor his congregation, and he prayed hours a day, crying out for more of God. He one time asked God, "What do I have to do to get more of you?" And God said, "Pray more." So he prayed more hours a day, a tremendous investment of prayer. Why? Because he was praying too small. All he wanted was more of God for himself and his little congregation. God wanted to birth a whole new movement into human history through him. And he couldn't see the bigness of what God wanted to do. Therefore, he prayed for more of God for himself. Now let's bring it a little closer to home. Look at the 60s and the move of God among young people in English-speaking languages around the world. That was driven initially by the brokenness of young people. So many kids that grew up in a good Christian home went off into all sorts of sin and all sorts of spiritual activity that they should not be involved in. And as a result of that, people prayed. Moms and dads and grandparents and brothers and sisters and deacons and pastors and Sunday school teachers, there was a tremendous outpouring of prayer for these prodigals to come home. Now, God clearly intended to send the Jesus movement. But why did He take so long? Why was it so many years after the beginning of this brokenness before God answered prayer? I'll tell you, it's because people were praying too small. There was a vast amount of prayer that went up for the children of godly parents who were walking in sin. But there was very little passion in the church for the children of ungodly parents who were walking in sin. There was not a passion for the pre-Christian hippie like there was for the formally biblicized hippie. And so God very firmly gathered up the too small prayers for generation, and He stored them in His bowls until it was time to pour out a renewal that not only brought home the prodigals, but reached many people who had never seen or heard of Jesus Christ before then. And God answered the prayer, even though it was prayed too small initially. I believe we are in the midst of exactly the same situation with the abortion movement. There has been no issue in church history that has generated as much prayer, as vigorously, as sincerely, with as many different radical expressions of that prayer as the abortion issue, particularly here in the States. There has been unity across the body of Christ. There has been expressions at every level, every imaginable way, warfare in the heavenlies and intercession to break the spirit of abortion, and we have had practically no movement on a national level in all these years. Why? I strongly believe that it's because we're praying too small. I don't believe abortion is the issue. I believe abortion is the fruit. I believe the root issue is the spirit of fathering that needs to come into America. If we outlawed abortion tomorrow, it would not solve the fact that a great number of men particularly have no passion to be a father. They have no grief over discarding one of their own children. So God has to strike at the root issue. And when God releases the revival of Malachi 4:6, when a fathering spirit runs across this nation, it doesn't matter how legal abortion is in any law in any court, there will be abortion clinics going out of business right and left because they have no business, because God struck to the root. And if we would begin to cry out to God for the spirit of fathering, if we would become passionate about bringing in this new move of God and inviting Him to do a work in us in any way He needs to stir up our heart for fathering, that would accelerate the work that needs to be done for abortion to be broken. But prayers for abortion, well-meaning though they are too small, because that is fruit. The root is in the heart of men and women, the parents. I would suggest to you that the immense volume of prayers that have been offered up by you singles, crying out to God for a husband or a wife for yourself, those were righteous prayers. Those were godly prayers. Those were prayers absolutely, completely, totally in accordance with the will of God. But I'm also kindly but firmly suggesting that possibly you are praying too small. That possibly this isn't primarily about you. It isn't primarily about your need for a family, but it is part of God's cosmic struggle with the enemy. That it would be very wise for us to pour some time and effort into crying out for the spirit of fathering to be released at a greater, deeper, wider level across this nation. Because the singleness issue is completely wrapped up in the issue of broken marriages, abortion, and cohabitation. All of it flows from the same root. And as God moves in with power, whether it is through new marriages of those that will be getting married soon, or whether it is through established marriages, whichever way God chooses to go, or both, when the spirit of fathering sweeps over this nation, singleness will change as well as those issues. Continue to pray for your spouse. Pray for your spouse vigorously, daily, regularly. But I would encourage you to also pray for the bigger picture, for the global outpouring of the spirit of fathering that was absolutely promised to us in Malachi 4:6. That is our most strategic prayer.